Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, The Dark Web Exposing the Business of Cybercrime. I know for some of you it's noon and you're enjoying your lunch, your lemon meringue, and just your food, but we're excited to have you on. My name is Ike Mwaba. I'm your host for today's broadcast. Before we start, I'd like to go over some webinar housekeeping tips. Everyone is currently on mute and will remain so throughout the recording. Please use the chat window to inform us of any audio or technical issues. If you experience sound issues, we recommend calling in via phone instead of using your computer's audio. We'll conduct 2 live polls throughout the webinar, and please join us. We want this to be interactive as we go through it. Throughout the webinar, please use the question feature to ask about any of the topics being discussed. We'll make sure to address as many questions as we can at the end. Again, as I mentioned, we want this to be interactive, so please use the function Ask Questions as we go through the session with you. Today's webinar is being recorded, and a link to an edited version will be sent to all attendees post-event. So with us today, we have Chris Hinckley, the head of our threat resistant unit here at Armor. Chris, can you tell us a little bit about your role and what you do with Armor?
Sure, absolutely. So I've been here at Armor, just celebrated 15 years last December. Started our security department years ago, and then most recently heading up our threat resistance unit, which is responsible for threat intelligence, understanding criminal behavior, and then also helping our security operations center with their 24/7 by 365 detections.
That's awesome. Thank you, Chris. And again, we're excited to have you on, and just thank you for agreeing to just jump in here and share a lot of the knowledge that you've gained throughout the years with Armor. And so today, as we talk through, let's just look at the agenda real quick. As you guys can read, for our agenda today is that we're going to talk about the business of the dark market, and then we're going to talk about cybercrime-as-a-service, what exactly cybercrime is. It seems like everything today is as a service, and so we'll go into detail of that piece. Then, of course, the importance of staying vigilant, that constant vigilance, and we'll, in that section, talk a little bit about how our Armor addresses cybercrime. And then finally, we'll end it up with Q&A. And as I mentioned on the Q&A section, please use the question features to submit your questions, because we do want to address and make this as interactive as possible. But before we start and before we kick it off, what we want to do is we want to jump into a poll question. And so with the poll that we're going to do for our first one, the question is, in the last 12 months, have you suffered a security threat or data breach? And so the poll has been open, so please feel free to answer it, and so we'll take a look at the results. And as you're doing the poll question, some of the tidbits that I looked up as I was preparing for this section is that 56% of Americans they don't know what to do if infected or affected by a breach. Chris, any thoughts on that, just in terms of for individual consumers as they are impacted by breach, what should they do, or what are some of the things that they should be aware of?
I think one of the biggest things people should be aware of is most organizations don't disclose their breaches, whether they're legally liable or not. It's not good PR. A lot of people say bad PR is also, you know, good. Any kind of press is good press. So a lot of organizations obviously don't subscribe to that. It damages their brand, it damages their trust. But I guess to put it simply, using different passwords for every site or service that you use, but also putting as little information as possible in those sites, address, phone number, that kind of stuff, not necessarily always required.
That's awesome. Thanks, Chris. And so the poll is closed. And so from what we find is that 58% says that they have not been impacted by a breach. We have 28% that have that mentioned only 1 or 2 breaches, and then there's a smaller amount that says several threats or breaches. So it seems like about half of the folks that are on the call, they have not experienced that breach, which is a good thing. As expected for this year, there's expected to be a $6 trillion cost of cybercrime for 2021, which is significant. So as we go through the year, I know we're already past that first month. Just let's continue to be vigilant as we go through this presentation. We'll give you tidbits and tools to be able to stay ahead of the curve on the breaches. And so let's jump into the webinar. So the first thing is the business of the dark market. what I'm going to do is I'm just going to lay it up high level, tell you a little bit about the information, and I'll pass it over to Chris. And what we want to do is we don't want to bore you with slides, so we want this to be as interactive as possible. So just on the first slide, beneath the surface of the web, when you hear about the web, a lot of times what happens is that people think of the top part, the surface web, which is what basically the internet that can be indexed by search engines like Google, like Yahoo, like Bing, like DuckDuckGo, etc. So that's a small subset of what the web is, but then there's more, right? So there's the deep web, which is a part that is not able to be indexed by those standard search engines. And then of course the dark web, which is the core of what we're going to talk about today, which is that dark market. Based on the research that we've done, we'll give you some insights of what is actually happening in there. And so that's only accessible with specific software configuration authorization. So words like Tor, words like onion, we'll dive into that a little bit. But Chris, any flavor that you want to add into these categorizations of the web here?
For sure, and we were talking earlier, Ike, and we were talking, so when you think of the internet as a whole, it's very similar, like I said earlier, like a hippopotamus, you only see a little bit up at the top, but there's a lot more underneath the water, or in this case, an iceberg. But the part that everyone sees, or the part that everyone uses in regards to the internet every day, is the surface web. So the surface web is, close to a couple billion sites, more or less, depending on what's spun up and what's spun down. But it's everything that is indexed by Google or by Bing. If you wanted to go search for something to shop for, if you wanted to look for information on a particular subject, there's millions and billions of websites out there, and you have no idea where that website is until you go look in Google or Bing or whatever search engine is your favorite. But you go and you do a search, and it shows you the address to that website. Conversely, in the deep web, which includes the dark web, is all of those unindexed sites, whether it's personal websites for your own purpose, whether it's college research websites, certain credentialed websites, things that might not necessarily be indexed because they have explicit instruction to tell Google not to index them, or it's just something that's not for public use in a lot of cases. But there's many more billions of websites that aren't necessarily cataloged by Google or Bing or other search engines. Part of that deep web, which we're going to talk about today, is the dark market. The dark market is, again, unindexed, but a lot of that is because of the technical hurdles that are required to actually access the dark web. The dark web largely, and it's not exclusively, but largely is illegal activity or malicious activity, something that you wouldn't necessarily see on a street corner, for instance, or down Main Street. It's going to be in a back alley, which is an analogy I like to use. But the dark web requires particular network access that is not necessarily publicized to a huge degree, but there's special technological steps that are required to get there. And then once you get there, those websites aren't indexed, at least in a consistent fashion. And in fact, a lot of times those web addresses change on a regular schedule, some every hour. But to give you an idea on the size of that dark web, the subset of those sites is generally, I guess below 10,000 active sites at any given moment, and based on our research. While there's maybe 55, 60, even 100,000 websites on that dark web, as far as at one point, or even being cataloged by web crawlers and whatnot, there's generally only 8 to 10,000 live at any given moment.
That's interesting. And so I know some of the things that you talked about, right, is that for the surface web, it's being indexed, or it can be indexed. What makes it hard for the major providers to index the dark web or the deep web? Any thoughts on that? And then we can just continue to go on.
Generally speaking, the way Google, I'm going to use Google as an example, indexes websites, it uses links, it uses web configurations, it uses DNS records, it uses all sorts of things that are publicly available in order to index those sites. In a lot of cases, there are no links to some websites. Maybe your organization has a corporate website somewhere that's out there on the internet that may not be indexed. It's because it's either explicitly told Google and other search engines that honor the instruction to not index that site, or it's simply because there's really no links to that site and Google has no way to know about it. It hasn't been submitted. A lot of the times, Google index things based on user submissions as well.
That's awesome. That's great information. And then I know you touched real quick on, before we dive into the dark web, how are folks accessing the dark web? Any insights on that?
Primarily Tor. So Tor is a proxy network that requires software in order to route traffic through a series of what's called Tor nodes. And those proxies transfer traffic encrypted to what's called an exit node, and that exit node is then where the traffic is decrypted and then sent to these websites. And some of these websites are hosted, or the dark web websites are hosted in a way that only allow access from the Tor network. And then URLs or domains are generally some level of entropy, meaning a random string of characters and numbers with a .onion extension on the end instead of a .com or a .net, but that's generally speaking how the dark web is accessed.
Awesome, that's fascinating. So let's continue, and then we'll continue to make this as interactive as possible. Okay. So Chris, come on.
Yeah, absolutely. So the big reason is, okay, there's a lot of malicious and bad activity happening on the dark web. Why is that important? And from a threat researcher's point of view, my team's point of view, it's extremely important in terms of keeping up to date with the current TTPs or tactics, techniques and procedures of adversaries in terms of what do we need to be prepared to protect against, what do we need to be prepared to detect, and how is the threat landscape evolving in terms of what affects our customers and the industry as a whole. So being able to understand and actually see through the lens of a bad guy, for lack of a better term, we're able to use that information to help derive more effective security measures and countermeasures to protect our customers. Also, unfortunately, regardless of who you are, and what you do, you're not going to be able to be 100% effective 100% of the time. So being able to detect that potential compromise or breach and do it as far left on the kill chain as possible, meaning before the bad guy has an opportunity to actually take malicious action and be able to stop that is hugely important. So understanding the intelligence that we derive from our dark web research helps us make better risk decisions and better security decisions.
So in terms of the TTPs that you mentioned, the tactics, techniques, and procedures, how can organizations learn about those things? Or if they don't have threat intelligence, what are some of the tools or ways that they can be able to understand the threat actors, TTPs?
Sure. Obviously, your standard news websites that are cybersecurity focused, following Armor press releases and Armor reports, as well as many others. There's tons of information to glean from industry experts, but also keeping certain security software and security measures up to date. For instance, just to use, I guess, the most basic or the most prolific antivirus or EDR solution is going to constantly have updates. And the reason those products have updates is because the threat landscape changes. New variants of already known malware, new malware comes out, new detection mechanisms are available. So the biggest hurdle, I guess, from a security standpoint that I've seen across the industry that we've seen is trying to react to a snapshot of a point in time instead of constantly being on your toes and understanding that the threat landscape is constantly evolving. Doing a vulnerability scan, for instance, is only going to give you that snapshot at that point in time. It's going to give you your security posture of your environment at a specific point in time, where if you're constantly performing security scans, you can understand trends in your infrastructure, you can understand your risk as it evolves over time.
Awesome. And I know you mentioned the word threat landscape a few times. Can you define that a little bit, and then we can just level set because I know we have a different set of folks on the audience. Can you define that a little bit?
Sure, absolutely. So on the attacker side, in order to understand risk from a security standpoint, or at least from a threat standpoint, you need to understand what that threat profile or threat landscape looks like. So the threat landscape is, okay, who are the bad guys? What are their TTPs? What tools and tactics are they using? But then also, who are they targeting? So understanding that from the bad guy side, but on your side as well, understanding your attack surface. And the attack surface is what percentage or what part of your infrastructure is vulnerable to an attack. What are the bad guys what knobs are they able to twist? What locks are they able to jiggle in terms of trying to get into your infrastructure? So on your side, the attack surface, and on the bad guy side, threat landscape.
Understood. So we'll continue.
For sure. So one of the biggest draws of the dark web as it pertains to cyber criminals is anonymous marketplaces. So anonymity, just first off, anonymity is not synonymous with security, but anonymity, one of the aspects of anonymity is going through the Tor network. And just real quick backtracking on that and kind of explaining that. When you go through the Tor network or any form of VPN, for instance, Tor network works similarly to a VPN, but there's a little higher level of anonymity there. Your traffic is being routed encrypted to an endpoint. And that endpoint, in Tor's case, is through a series of proxies. You ever watch CSI or one of those crime shows, and they're showing, hey, we're tracking down the hacker, and they're looking through the map on the big screen, and it bouncing all over the world. That's kind of how Tor works, in a sense that it's going through, your traffic's going through a bunch of different proxies, and those proxies could be anywhere. It's just part of a huge network, a mesh network. So once your traffic gets to the endpoint or the exit node, or in the VPN's case, the VPN server, it's then decrypted, your traffic, and then sent to the endpoint website that you're trying to visit. And in Tor's aspect, anonymous marketplaces. But the anonymity comes from the fact that your traffic is exiting the same endpoint or the same IP or the same origin, at least from the website's aspect, as a bunch of other people. So your traffic is basically surrounded by noise. So there's no way to pick out, hey, there's Ike's traffic in that huge flow of information, unless you log into your Facebook, you log into your email, you log into something that's personally identifiable to you. Obviously, your anonymity's gone there, but from a signal to noise ratio, using a VPN or Tor helps that anonymity. So circling back to the anonymous marketplaces, the dark web is full of basically criminal eBays, so to speak. I don't want to put anything bad on eBay, but it's the closest thing that we can relate to these dark webs, in a sense that you've got a lot of. Oh, absolutely. You've got a lot of goods and services for sale by owner, essentially. So using Tor and PGP and escrow systems, there's zero trust marketplaces, in a sense that people are selling all sorts of things, from stolen information to stolen credentials to hacked systems to drugs to illegal services, laundered money, you name it. But there's millions of users on these dark web marketplaces. There's thousands or hundreds of thousands of sellers, but there's specialized markets as well, where eBay's kind of like your one size fits all. You've got malware marketplaces, you've got drug marketplaces, you've got all sorts of different specialized marketplaces, even COVID-19 marketplaces, where people are selling PPE and bootleg drugs and that kind of stuff. But one of the most prolific or publicized, I guess, dark markets that was taken down by the FBI years ago is Silk Road. If you've ever read up on Silk Road or read news or press releases on Silk Road, that was a dark web marketplace. It's kind of like take one down, three more pop up kind of scenario.
So it seems as though, I know you used the reference of eBay, and again, not nothing on eBay, but it seems like
For
there's a
sure.
lot of different marketplaces, not just one main one, but just a lot of different ones that have different specializations and things that they sell. Is that correct?
For sure, absolutely. So there's niche marketplaces, but there's also your kind of Walmart of marketplaces where they sell everything under the sun and everything's available. So a lot of these are very reputation driven, just like another marketplace would be. Sellers have stars, sellers have reviews, that kind of stuff. But the zero trust comes in where money's held in escrow until both parties are satisfied, and then disputes are handled that way. But there's a lot of similarities between dark web marketplaces and other marketplaces, except for the goods and services sold.
Understood. And not to belabor this section here, but just I know you mentioned reviews and stars. Are those reviews linked to individuals, or or I guess they create their own pseudonyms and their own identities within those web? Like how does that work?
For sure, they're linked to personas. So your handle on anonymous marketplace may be something totally anonymous and different than your name, which you probably want it to be. But you ever watch the movie Hackers? You got Zero Burn, you got Crash Override, you got all those handles that you would never be able to figure out who the real person is from the handle itself or from the account itself. But absolutely, the reputation, just like it would be in criminal enterprise in the streets, reputation is everything on these anonymous marketplaces. So sellers protect that pretty
close. No, that's awesome. Yeah, let's continue. And then just one of the things I know, looking at the questions as we continue. So Tor, someone asked, what is Tor network? It's the onion ring, the onion router. I think that's what the acronym itself stands for, right? So,
right. And it's getting easier to access that. One thing I do want to caveat is what we're talking about and sites we're talking about, the dark web and things like that. Please don't use your corporate laptop. Don't use your home computer. When we do this research, we use very segmented and purpose-built systems for this. Not that they're necessarily any more secure, but they're very segmented, and they don't have the same network access, and they're not on the same network, and they don't have any personal data. They don't have any ties. Do that at your own risk, but that's kind of why we're giving this presentation, to kind of help you get the insight into this type of information without actually having to visit it yourself.
That's right. Awesome. So let's continue.
Cryptocurrency has actually been making the news quite a bit more recently, but crypto, at least in a large sense, was a reaction to bailouts of banks in Wall Street in 2008. It gave currency the decentralization that people wanted, in a sense, and it's basically digital bits that hold value. But there's huge market caps in crypto nowadays. Everybody's familiar with Bitcoin, I would imagine, but there's thousands of different cryptocurrencies. A lot of these cryptocurrencies are for monetary value, which is good, but a lot of these are also for development value. It helps decentralized and auditable things like voting, for escrow purposes, for anonymity, for something that can't be controlled by a single entity. In fact, the good test of cryptocurrency, they say, is if you were to tell the creator to stop it, well, Bitcoin's instance, we don't even know the creator, but if you were to tell the creator to shut it down, would they be able to? In most cases, no. But as far as the dark market is concerned, crypto is cash of the internet. There's tons of anonymity there, just like you wouldn't go buy something illegal in the real world, I guess, not on the internet, with your credit card or something that has a paper trail. You wouldn't do that on the internet as well if you're doing malicious things. So a lot of cyber criminals, especially these dark markets, flock to cryptocurrency. Bitcoin being the biggest. Bitcoin is largely touted as gold of crypto, but there's also other cryptocurrencies that provide for better anonymity, like Monero and Zcash and things of that nature that these dark markets use. In fact, just a quick aside, Ike, when we're talking about the WannaCry ransomware that hit globally a few years ago, a lot of those ransom payments were done in Bitcoin. And so Bitcoin is traceable in a sense that you're able to trace the amount, what wallets it went through, and you can kind of follow it through the Bitcoin network. And eventually that money has to make it into fiat or US dollars or whatever fiat the criminal wants to use. So you're able to kind of follow that money through the series of different wallets and see which Bitcoin wallets that money went to, but kind of track it that way. Whereas something like Monero, in fact, I believe the criminals that perpetrated the WannaCry stuff and the NotPetya stuff, the FBI was tracking that money, and then they laundered it to Monero, which there's numerous ways to do that, but they laundered it to Monero, which is another cryptocurrency, and it was untraceable. So Monero is focused on anonymity, whereas Bitcoin has levels of anonymity, but is not completely anonymous.
So in the example, I'm sorry, in the example of Monero, so how then does a threat actor or an end of a hacker, you could say, how then do they then convert that over to fiat, right? To actual hard currency, if it's similar to Bitcoins but not the same.
For sure, and so you can't necessarily, from my understanding, trace Monero or something similar like Zcash the same way you can Bitcoin. So generally, what cyber criminals do is launder that through the network, and when I say launder, they'll send money out, a billion different ways that kind of converge back, and it's hard to trace that way. But they'll sit on that money for a while, whether it's months, years, weeks, whatever, and then not make a huge withdrawal at some point. But there's plenty of crypto exchanges that allow the conversion of cryptocurrency to fiat, and I guess it would be some sort of random withdrawal or something like that. But it's not going to be, hey, let me withdraw 10 million or $30 million from this crypto. It's probably going to be in smaller amounts, and there's ways to do it. And in fact, it's been around for years and years with cash and banks and everything else. It's just an evolved method of money laundering, so to speak.
Understood. So they take a while, but then they get their money one way or another, right? So ultimately.
Absolutely. So whenever cyber criminals and threat actors do their transactions on the dark market, they're using cryptocurrency almost exclusively. If they're not trading wares and goods and services and whatnot. But it's definitely interesting watching the evolution of these dark markets and their cryptocurrency usage, especially as new cryptos come to the market and as their market cap grows and things of that nature. In fact, here on the slide, you're able to see 76 billion, at least when this report was done, is done in Bitcoin every year.
Understood. So we'll continue.
Absolutely. So we're talking about what you can buy on the dark market. You name it. One of the biggest things that kind of sparked our interest and that we investigated quite a bit was what's known as fulls. It's full sets of information of either businesses or personal data. And there's lists of breaches, whether it's Facebook or LinkedIn or some random game site or what have you, but there's thousands and thousands of breaches that have happened over the course of the last decade. And all this information ends up curated and kind of formatted and normalized and then put up for sale. And a lot of these breaches don't have a whole lot of information, so to speak. A lot of them do, a lot of them don't. Some are bigger than others and more important than others. But even if some random game website were to get hacked and you got someone's email and their password, I guarantee you 90% of the time you can go log into their Facebook, you can go log into their bank account, you can go log in and grab all this information and believe me or believe it that it's automated now to where these threat actors have automated ways of trying these in various different websites and various different, financial websites and social media platforms and whatnot to get as much information as they can. But if there's a breach that has all this information, all that work is done for them already. But you think, okay, you got my name, my social. It's basically identity theft at this point. Regarding a business full or fulls, you can essentially apply for credit as that company. You've got their bank account information. You've got all sorts of information that you could use to either come up huge financially, ruin that business. It's very scary when you think about the possibilities that you're able to carry out with that information. And then personally, I mean, you can ruin someone's life or take out credit. I mean, you name it. It's just basically easy information to perform identity theft with, whether it's corporate or personal. But that information is out there and it's cheap.
Yeah, and for that, whether it's a business fulls or personal fulls, is there one that is worth more than others? And I know we're going to dive into some of the data points and costs and things like that, but any views on that based on the research?
For sure. I mean, your personal fulls would be probably worth more than my personal fulls, just from a financial standpoint. But I'm just saying, people are different. Obviously, companies are different. It just depends. So it depends on. So if you were a threat actor that had expertise or a team of expertise that knew how to go after businesses and extract the most money there, that'd be fine. If you would have more success with a business fulls, obviously. Obviously, there's probably a higher level of risk there, right? Because the business, attacking a business comes with different consequences than a person. You have the ability to possibly inflict more monetary damage, which then escalates punishment and so on and so forth. On the personal side, if you are a low-level criminal that wants to maybe grab a new credit card in someone's name and then go, rack up purchases before you end up throwing that card away or whatever, or maybe even do something more nefarious, a personal maybe. So it just depends on the end goal. And again, most of the criminals on the dark market and their purchasers, their interest is financial gain. So at the end of the day, it's a balance of risk versus reward versus level of effort.
No, that makes sense. And so we're going to speak through some of the details, but well, not details, but let's continue. Okay.
For sure.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's fine. So another big deal is obviously credit cards have been sold for ages, even before dark markets. Dark markets make it easier. But one of the things we've noticed as far as trends is money laundering, in a sense that even though these dark market sellers have a high level of anonymity and a high level of personal security based on the fact of what they do and their longevity, is they even want to remove themselves further from risk in terms of laundering money. So if they come into a large data dump, or they're able to take all the data and curate that data and get all this data ready to sell, and they want to sell this data, instead of them having to hire money mules to go get this money, or doing it themselves, they'll basically sell money for pennies on the dollar in order to profit from that data they have, but then also pass the risk on to the buyer. So for instance, if you want a debit card or something, and that debit card has a $10,000 balance, verified balance. Don't ask me how they do that, but they verify balances on these cards.
Yeah.
If they have a $10,000 balance, you could buy it for $1,000 easy, and then you assume the risk of using that however you use that card. Same thing with transferring money to Western Union or PayPal or bank transfers. If you give the seller a bank account number, you can buy money for 10, 12 cents on the dollar again. So it's a different way of money laundering.
Yeah, and so that's interesting, right? It seems like people are willing to assume the risk, right? So they're not they're willing to assume the risk for potential bigger payoff, but it comes with a bigger risk compared to the actual individuals that are doing the hacking.
For sure, and you've got to look at it this way, at least from the buyer's perspective, is they're not going to put in the effort or they don't have the expertise in order to get the data, but they still want to profit from the data. So having the benefit of being able to get the data, the seller can then separate himself from risk and make, again, 10 cents on the dollar, but they're sitting on $1 million, $1 million, $2 million, $10 million worth of goods, at least in their pocket. So they're not getting screwed by any means, but at the same time, they don't have to assume that risk, and then their criminal enterprise can last another day.
Yeah, and then even with that, I'm going to go to the next slide. But as they are doing that, how often are the same information resold? Is it sold once, and then, or can it be sold multiple times? And like a personal full, as an example, my information can be sold to many different buyers, or how does that work?
It just depends on the seller. So depending on their feedback and their reputation, as a cyber criminal, you probably want to buy from someone that says, hey, fresh numbers, never sold, exclusive purchase. You're going to probably pay a little bit more, but it's probably not going to be used. Where other people may just be selling bulk numbers and saying you find which ones are good. Again, it's just like anything. You would go buy something on eBay, you're going to do research first, or if you go buy something on the internet, you're going to do research first, and you're going to buy from the seller that makes you feel the most comfortable. It offers the product that exactly what you want. And one thing I wanted to mention too, Ike, is unfortunately financial crime. I had the pleasure of speaking with a local fraud detective for a municipality here, and we just got into talking about fraud and whatnot. But he said, unfortunately, 90% of fraud cases don't even get investigated or don't get solved because of the lack of manpower. So when you're talking about these people on the end buyers assuming risk, it's all relative because here at the municipal level, unfortunately, the manpower is hamstringing these detectives in order of going after all the fraud because it's so rampant. And then you take that up to a federal level that may or may not work as efficient as the municipal level, and you get millions of fraud cases with thousands of potential detectives. So it's just something that's rough to combat, at least from a law enforcement perspective.
That's interesting. So what you're saying is that there's not a lot of risk for those threat actors, or are you?
I'm not encouraging anybody. Obviously, illegal stuff will get you thrown in prison, but unfortunately, there's not a lot of risk for the end buyer in a lot of cases, especially with the anonymity Tor and cryptocurrency provide. It just depends.
Yeah. And so just with that, can we go through just malware and just cybercrime-as-a-service and then just continue?
For sure, absolutely. So cybercrime-as-a-service is, like you said, everything nowadays is a service. A lot of ransomware has transitioned to the as-a-service model, meaning that you can essentially pay access to a service, go punch a few boxes, type in a few parameters, and boom, you have a custom ransomware that you can now go distribute. If you don't know how to, you can pay for the service of actually distributing your ransomware. So you can literally get into the ransomware game, for instance, with zero technical ability. It's lowering the barrier to entry to a lot of the cybercrime, again, transferring the risk, but also becoming more prolific in the process. So when you talk about ransomware, you talk about hacking, you talk about all sorts of stuff that now that barrier of entry for the technical side is removed.
Understood. And I know I feel like I skipped a slide before. So also on top of that, there's cybercrime-as-a-service, but then also folks can, purchase malware, purchase ransomware without using it as a service. Is that correct? Or any view on that side?
For sure. So we talked about the bootleg drugs. We talked about the money laundering. We talked about the personal data. I mean, you can go and buy actual malware, custom malware coded to your specific requirements. You can go buy hacked computers, meaning someone's gone and hacked a bunch of corporate computers or personal computers, and they're selling those, again, at varying levels of quality based on whether or not they've been used or not. But you can go in and buy all sorts of different technological things from a software perspective, malware, ransomware, frameworks. You can go and actually buy or I guess courses, hacking courses, or coding courses on the malicious side. And one of the huge trends we've noticed, which is very interesting, is customer service has become a lot more important to these sellers in terms of, hey, you bought our Ransomware-as-a-service, we've got a live chat window now, or you can email our 24/7, 365 support or what have you. So it's getting interesting as you start to see affiliate programs pop up, for instance, for ransomware and whatnot.
And just talk about the anonymity as well. So for those folks that are doing the customer service and creating their marketplace, do they still maintain, or are they still able to maintain that and I can't say the word anonymity within the dark market as well, or does it create an exposure?
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. So in terms of anonymity and operational security, as funny as it may sound, operational security is as much a skill as hacking. Being able to stay anonymous and not trip up and not expose yourself, so to speak, identity-wise is a skill in its own. But operational security is huge in terms of you see a lot of these sellers and a lot of these merchants. They're around for a while. They're around for years. They're around for long time, where some of these aren't, and who knows, maybe they delivered a package to the wrong address, or maybe they put their real return address on a package full of cocaine or something, who knows. But it just depends. But operational security is definitely a skill that a lot of people don't have.
Understood. And so what we'll do now is that we'll dive into the second poll question, and then we'll talk about the constant vigilance. So as we take a look at just the second poll questions, the question is, do you feel your business is prepared to combat or recover from a breach in the next 12 months? And so this is critical, right? As we've heard about all the different things that are available out there in the dark web. So whether it's cybercrime-as-a-service, whether it's hacking, whether it's purchasing ransomware, etc. So for you as a business, do you feel like you're prepared to combat or recover in the case of a breach of your customer information, your employee information, your internal IP getting out there in the marketplace? I'd love to see what you guys think. And then as you guys are doing that, right? So one of the facts that is out there is that the average cost of a breach, as we looked at 2020, was $3.86 million. So this also ties into the first poll that we gave. So for those that have been impacted, it will be interesting to see what that impact looks like as well. So for you, Chris, I know we're going to dive into it, but just any thoughts on that question on just being prepared and that recovery from a breach, what that looks like?
I think that that's a very loaded question. It's a recipe of a bunch of different things: asset management, vulnerability management, data recovery, all sorts of different aspects that go in. But I think the biggest thing is identifying the most crucial parts of your organization and business, and understanding all aspects that I mentioned of that infrastructure, of that data, and how it should be protected, and how you should prepare in order to restore that.
Understood. And so
we'll dive in deeper here in a little bit.
Exactly. And so in some ways, it seems like data classification is very important, right? Understanding what the data is and what is very, what's critical for an organization, what is not as much, right? So it seems like some of those things are important there.
One of the biggest issues I see when talking to different organizations is they want to be secure and they want to have the most effective protection and be the most secure, but in a lot of instances, they don't even know the entirety of what they're trying to protect or what their goal is in protection. So I think a little bit of cart before the horse sometimes in that scenario, but knowing what you need to protect and knowing what data you have is extremely important.
Understood. Now that makes sense. And so just I know the poll is closed now, right? And so the results show that 27% of the folks on the bridge mentioned that they are very prepared. We have 65%, which is somewhat prepared. So as they go through sessions like this and as they continue to learn, right, I think it'll help equip them to be more prepared. And then we have 8% that stated that they are not prepared at all. So it's interesting to see the gamut of where individuals are in terms of their preparedness on that. And so, Chris, if you want to take it on just what vigilance looks like and just that constant vigilance.
For sure. So understanding, like I was mentioning, understanding what you have to protect and what you need to protect. Was kind of circling back to the beginning of our webinar here. Understanding your attack profile or your attack surface, and then conversely, understanding the threat profile. What is most important to you? What's exposed? What could be attacked? And how would it be attacked? And understanding where each piece of that puzzle lies in kind of a risk assessment. One of the big things we say around here is don't suck at patching. A lot of times, most of these breaches or most of these compromised systems are exploited through something that could have easily been patched. Outdated software, outdated, you name it. But even then, misconfigured firewalls. It just depends. A lot of the times, some of these applications are exposed to the internet when they shouldn't be. One of the things people don't talk about much is kind of abuse of trust or implied trust. If you have a third party that has access into your infrastructure, in Target's case, it was their HVAC company when they got hacked a while back. But if you have a third party that's got access to your infrastructure, make sure that they only have the minimum access they need, and make sure that they're vetted just as much as you would vet yourself or any other third party. But having that implied trust, just because you have a business agreement, is not always good, and understanding where your data is at all times. So of course, we've identified the data. We now trust our third party, but where is my data? If you're allowing employees, for instance, to put data to share on a personal Dropbox, on a file share service, on YouTube, wherever, you no longer have control of that data, and that data is no longer under your control security-wise. One of the things I harp on quite a bit, and I know a lot of other people do too, are people are always going to be your biggest security vulnerability. It's hard to upgrade people, it's hard to patch people, but constant security awareness training, keeping people up to date on what you find from a threat profile, what you find from a risk assessment standpoint, and then also keeping them up to date on what's new and refreshing their skill set on identifying spam, visiting risky sites, that kind of stuff, and data custodianship is huge. But yeah, there's tons and tons of different aspects that you can look. I think the biggest are understanding what you need to protect, and then taking care of your people from a knowledge standpoint.
That's awesome. And so can you just share a little bit just Armor's approach and how we do business and some of the things that we provide as an organization?
Absolutely. So our biggest thing is providing security outcomes for organizations and making their security a little bit more comprehensive, efficient, and easy. Being able to take data from their organization, use that data to help better protect them, but also provide 24/7 by 365 detections, incident monitoring. Again, protecting as far left as possible in that kill chain, so that any potential compromise, dwell times minimized, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and one of the things that, just to add to it too, right? Ultimately, what we want to do is that we want to ensure that we help customers protect their data in any environment. And so we know that organizations today are in multiple different environments. So whether they're in private cloud, public cloud, multi-cloud environments, hybrid cloud environments, they're distributed, even their workforce when you look at endpoint. And so how do you unify that across the board so that you really understand what's going on, have that context and insight, and be able to protect organizations and customers from the malicious activities that we talked about today? And so that's one of the things that we're really key and what we want to do. And then I know we didn't talk compliance throughout this session as well, but compliance is a major benefit of what we provide, because being compliant doesn't necessarily mean that you're safe. However, compliance is it's critical to be compliant, depending on where you are in terms of the industry that you serve as well. So just want to pull that out as well.
I like how you frame that. It's compliance is a byproduct of the security we provide. Again, so compliance, is broad spectrum, lowest common denominator for an entire industry. Every organization's infrastructure is different. All their security needs are different. So absolutely, compliance is a byproduct.
Exactly. Awesome. And then, so just key takeaways. I want to share some of the things.
For sure. So the primary goal, it's not the only goal, but the primary goal of cyber criminals is to make money. They'll do that any way possible, and they'll do it in creative methods, whether it's the lemonade stand approach or the mogul approach, kind of conquering a specific niche on dark markets. It's not as hard as you think for cyber criminals to use technologically advanced tools and techniques in order to attack your infrastructure. The barrier to entry is getting increasingly lower, almost to a point and click level for a lot of these services that are now offered on the dark web. And it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be impossible to protect yourself, but it means staying in the know, so to speak, and understanding and be able to build your own and understand the threat intelligence or the threat profile of the dark market, which is why we did this report, which is why we do this report every year, is to hopefully help protect others by exposing our findings.
Exactly. And ultimately, I think one of the major takeaways from your conversation is for threat actors, it's pretty easy and pretty simple. You don't have to have the knowledge to hack or get access to someone's data. But at the same time, that's why organizations like Armor are out there, so that we can make sure and prevent that breach and that threat from taking place in any organization. So those are great points. Yeah. And so just with that, one of the things I want to share with you guys is that, and when I say guys, it's guys and gals, of course, but we have resources available for you. And so we have this 2020 Dark Market Report available for you. You will get this presentation, so there is a link that you can link out to it. Also, what I want to ask is that if you have any questions, or if you want to see what Armor does and how we protect our customers, please request a demo. We are 100% available to show you and walk you through some of the things that we do to identify those CTPs and to be able to ensure that we protect organizations. And then, of course, we also do have threat reports available on our site. And so what I want to encourage you is to take a look and just be able to leverage some of those resources that we have available to you. And so at this time, we'd like to take a few questions from the audience. If you have not already submitted your questions, please use the question function. I saw a lot of questions coming through, and I tried to field some of those questions throughout my conversation with Chris. While you're submitting your questions, I do want to ask all attendees to participate in the quick survey that will be sent out after the broadcast, where you can provide us with a little feedback, let us know how we did, what we need to do better, etc. Also, if you think about a question once the broadcast is closed, you can also submit those questions in the post-broadcast survey as you rate our webinar for the day. If you'd like to attend our upcoming events, so sign up at armor.com/events. So with that, let me take a look at all the questions. I know there's a lot. We have fielded some, but we can dive in and take a look at it, okay? So let's see what I have. I'm gonna go to the top real quick and see. One of the questions that they asked is, what tools and technologies, processes enable or challenge access to the dark web? And so I know you've mentioned that a little bit, but any ideas on that side?
The question was what challenges or what kind of helps prevent access to
technologies? And again, you mentioned it with Tor, but can you just brush it over?
Yeah. Okay, I see. What's the technical barrier to accessing the dark web? Generally, it's going to be Tor. A lot of the times, that technology is easily accessible. I know there's certain web browsers that have Tor built in. I think the biggest barrier right now is information. Again, there's some websites that change domains every hour, but even then, it's not going to be a name like mydarkmarket.com. It's going to be a string of 64-ish numbers and letters and as the domain name. So it's not something that you're going to access unless you have the information in order to do so, whether it's word of mouth or otherwise.
Understood. And then another question is, do ISPs have the ability to block dark web access?
To some degree. So we have a list of Tor nodes, Tor proxy nodes and Tor exit nodes. So we can identify traffic that's generally on Tor nodes, and that list changes every day. You can set up a Tor node in your house if you want, but then again, there's risk involved in that for various reasons. But absolutely. So not with 100% certainty, but with a very, very high level of certainty, ISPs can block that. We block that in some of our networks and customers' networks.
Awesome. Another question is, do crypto networks ever touch banking and financial networks around the world? And if so, are banks taking the lead in fighting crime and fraud with that connection?
What was the question again, one more time?
So are crypto networks connected, or do they ever touch financial networks around the world? Are there linkages between those two networks? And so, are banks aware, and are they leading the fight against the fraud and the issues going on?
Generally, no. That's the beauty of it. A lot of people's eyes is that it has no bearing on financial institutions. There are some cryptos. I forget the name of it right now. I think it was XRP or something similar. That the whole premise, though, for this particular cryptocurrency is to enable bank transfers without having to go through multiple branches or multiple nodes or multiple hubs. It's an instant bank transfer, so there's no longer waiting on financial batches and that kind of stuff. But in the grand scheme of things, no, they don't. I know JP Morgan's interested in Bitcoin. I know Cash is. I know PayPal is, and other cryptos. But being reliant on those and going through those, no. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I thought you were talking. I thought we lost connection. But yeah, definitely. So being reliant on it. And so one of the things, just keeping looking at the time real quick, there's a lot of questions that we got. So what we're going to do is we're going to try to answer it post-event. But one of the questions also is whether this will be recorded. And yes, it is recorded, and it will be made available via email as well. So we'll send it post-event. So what I want to say is thank you once again for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us and listen to Chris Hinckley. And Chris, thank you for taking the time as well out of your schedule. So one of the things I want to encourage you is to please read the full dark market report and the Forrester's Total Economic Report that are also available at armor.com. And we'll make sure to send you all this information post-event. So thank you all so much and have a great day.
Thanks, Zach. Thanks, y'all.